So hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kent Branch November 2024 educational presentation. Tonight, we are co-hosting with the Kent Historical Society. My name is Cindy Robichaud, and I'm part of the Kent Branch operating team. Joining us from the Kent Historical Society are some of their members, but also Lisa and Jim Gilbert. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Before we begin, we wish to thank the McKinley family and staff for letting us hold this presentation in their beautiful facility. We appreciate their continued support of the community groups such as ours. Thank you so much. So tonight will be a hybrid meeting. I mentioned that a few minutes ago, which means not only do we have you fine folks here in the audience with us, we also have people that are joining us online. And when I checked this afternoon, there were over 40 people registered. So to help us do this, though, Colleen LeBay is our tech support, but we have this little device. It's called the Meeting Owl, and we need to thank the bicentennial branch of the United Empire Loyalists because it actually belongs to them, and they've lent it to us tonight. So thank you so much. This presentation will be recorded and available to you to watch later. So at home, for those who are watching us online, we ask you to use the chat if you have any questions for ourselves or for the speaker. Angela Churchill is in-house monitoring the chat box, and Linda Urquhart is in Windsor monitoring at her house. Thank you both, ladies. And as I say, Colleen is our technical support in-house as well. So before we begin, oh, I'm sorry, we have to back up on that one. So now let's begin. I had an extra slide in there. So for anyone joining us for the first time, we're the Kent branch of the Ontario Ancestors, and we have been focusing on gathering family history and local history in Chatham-Kent for, what are we at now, 47 years or something like that? So a long, long time. We offer assistance and education to researchers, and we promote and preserve family history and local history. Our family history library is housed on the second floor of the Chatham-Kent Public Library with over 45 years worth of material. We just have so much stuff. We're open Fridays and Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. and we also try to accommodate appointments. We like people to connect with us, so you can contact us by using our email. We have a very active Facebook group with almost 1,000 people on it. And we have a very comprehensive Kent Branch website that has materials not only for our branch members, but we have a lot of stuff there for the public. So be sure to go over, browse around, and see if we have something that might help you in your research. Our friends of the Kent Historical Society also focus on promoting education and preserving local history. And to tell us a bit more, I'd like to introduce Lisa Gilbert, who will tell us a bit more about the Kent Historical Society, what they've been up to, what they're doing, and she will introduce our speaker. Lisa?
Thank you very much, Cindy. The Kent Historical Society, unlike the OGS, is not very well connected electronically. We've been trying for years, but haven't been able to find anybody who's willing to help us do that. We're all old, and we don't know how to do it. So anybody out there is interested, we're certainly interested in working with you. But we do a lot in the community, and as Cindy has put on this slide here, we do the Kent Historical Society is well, myself as the president, we also run the Chatham-Kent Heritage Network. And that's a network of individuals and groups throughout Chatham-Kent who are involved in heritage volunteerism. Or in some cases, they're actually paid to do it. But it's a network of all the people throughout the municipality who are interested in heritage. And yes, our big project right now is the plaquing project. And we're just entering, as of yesterday, year 3 of our plaquing initiative. We have been quite successful, if I may say so myself. We have erected 12 heritage plaques around the municipality in the last 11 months. So check them out. They're very distinctive. They all, from a distance, look alike. They are blue and green in the municipal colors, and they tell very interesting stories, and we're continuing to work on them. We do also have meetings. This is a joint meeting with OGS. Our next meeting will be in February, on February the 12th. Our regular meetings are held at the, in Studio One at the Chatham Cultural Center. And we will be having, the trots, Ian and Lynn Trot. And thank you very much, Colleen, for the idea. They're going to be talking to us about the Find a Grave program, because they're very involved in that. So we welcome you if you're interested. And if you are interested in joining the Kent Historical Society, please talk to me sometime this evening. We welcome anybody and everybody. And I just want to promote, so I was cleaning out my garage the other day, and we have like 3 boxes of these books. These books don't sell themselves because they look kind of boring, but they're not. Very interesting. Kent Historical Society Papers and Addresses. This is volume 10, and it is excerpts from the Moravian Diaries. You know, we here in Chatham-Kent are very lucky that we have pioneers who actually recorded things. Most pioneers were so busy they didn't have diaries, but we had pioneers who recorded things because they had to, because they were reporting to head office in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And so the Moravians were wonderful diary keepers, and they recorded a lot of the things that happened in this area in the very early days. They came to Fairfield in 1792, and they left in 1813, came back, and of course went across the river and stayed there for over 100 years. In fact, they were the longest mission in North America, the longest serving mission in North America. Anyway, if you're interested, please talk to me. I have copies for the low, low price of $5. So I'm going to stop there and we'll move on. Oh yeah, I forgot about March the 29th. Oh yeah, well, we don't have details about March the 29th, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to involve a number of other community organizations and the Chatham-Kent Museum, and we've got a date planned. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's going to be a day of activities and information and things to do for adults, as well as some family-oriented activities that are all going to be transportation themed. So stay tuned for that. All right, I think now we can move on to the next slide. So tonight's presentation, we are very pleased and happy to have Kae Elgie come to speak to us. And as you see, it's the story of 200 acres in Kent County. Now, Kae, as you can see, she grew up in Camden Gore, so she is relatively local to us, but of course she moved away, but she's got very strong family ties still here in the Chatham-Kent area. And so but in the meantime, she went away and she did a lot of things. You can see there, she was past chair of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, the ACO, and she also the manager of information technology for the region of Waterloo Library, and I think in her free time, a reporter photographer for the Petrolia Advertiser. So she's going to come and speak to us about her family and some of her genealogy work. So without further ado, I welcome Kae Elgie up here to speak to you.
Well, thanks everyone, and I'm just going to check and see if my voice is clear for those out in the wide world, as well as here in the building. But anyway, I'm really happy for the opportunity to meet with you tonight. And this is actually my second time formally meeting with the Kent branch of Ontario Ancestors, as Marvin reminded me. Although we certainly had lots of informal discussions and tons of help from various members since I started working on this project in 2012. And I really don't know how I would have done it without the help from various people in the Kent branch of Ontario Ancestors and the Resource Center and so on. But ever since the first printing of my book came off the press in 2019, I've been really wanting to come and meet people from the Kent Historical Society. So I'm really happy about that tonight, and thanks so much, Cindy, for organizing this. And I'm curious, who is a member of the Kent Historical Society here? Okay, so, oh yeah, quite a few. And who is a member of the Genealogical Society? No, I think some people are both, but anyway, that's great. I know. Anyway, I have two goals for tonight. One is I wanted to share a few research tips and tricks in case anyone in the audience is also researching their family history or curious about the story of the property where they are living. And in return, I hope you'll share some tips and tricks with me, because there's always things we can learn from each other. And secondly, I want to share two stories. The first is a basic theme of my book, the very different ways that various people who lived on the 200 acres, the same 200 acres where I grew up since the Ice Age, the very different ways they viewed the land they lived on. And the second story is how taking this longitudinal approach, looking at the story of the land, has changed my thinking about the history of Chatham-Kent, and especially about the history of my own Elgie family. So here is a slide showing the land where I grew up. It's in Kent County in the watershed of the Sydenham River between Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair. And the top map shows the 200 acres farm that I grew up near Don Mills. People in Chatham-Kent will know that that's D-A-W-N Mills, but people elsewhere think it's the D-O-N, but no. And as you can see on the larger map, it's about halfway between London and Windsor. So my introduction to genealogy came through my mother, Ruth Elgie. Now, my dad died very young, just 68 years old, from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that was only diagnosed a couple of weeks before he died. So my mom did not have time to ask him all the questions she wanted to know, and it left her wondering, who were all these Elgies he talked about over the years, and how were they connected, if at all, to the Elgie farm that she had moved to when she married my dad in 1946. By this stage, both my dad's parents were dead, and there was no one else my mom could ask. So she set about contacting the various Elgies she'd heard my dad speak about, sending them letters, calling them after 11 o'clock at night when the long distance rates were cheaper. We may remember doing that back in the day, and so on. And this was back in the 1980s and 1990s, before there was internet, before there was email, before there was texting, before there was Ancestry.com. But she kept writing these letters and making these calls, and eventually she put together this list, a series of handwritten sheets, like you can see there, and an outline of the Elgie family, which we knew, settled in 1870 on the farm where we lived. And she got that date from my dad because he had been interviewed by the Kent branch of Ontario Genealogical Society, who published a book on century and near century farms. I'm not sure our farm ever got in the second edition, but I know that book was very useful to me when I was researching. Anyway, based on the notes from that interview, and plus information she picked up from Elgie relatives she discovered, and from her own memory of conversations with my dad, my mom had compiled this 20-page handwritten history, complete with a few photographs, and she was ready to publish it when somehow it had landed up in the hands of my family to complete it. But my mom had put together these notes back in 1870, and she'd even discovered who the previous owner was, and who acquired the land from the Canada Company, that big land development company at one time headed by John Galt, the founder of Guelph, Ontario. Anyway, it got handed to my family to do, and in 2012, when I retired from co-managing the Regional Water Libraries, I set to work on it. Now, being a retired librarian, I wanted to verify all the information I was given, and my mom had boxes and boxes and boxes of files and notes and photographs and so on. And so I made several trips from Waterloo, where I now live, back to the farm to interview her about these. And on one of these trips, my brother Bill came up to my mom's house for coffee and he said, "Hey, did I ever show you all those arrowheads Dad and I found on the farm?" Well, no, I didn't know anything about this. Well, it turns out we have a cousin, Darcy Fallon, who's an avocational archaeologist, who's in turn a good friend of a well-known and highly respected avocational archaeologist named Stanley Wartner, who some of you may know, and who my brothers knew because Stan Wartner and the Elgies are all maple syrup producers. So we invited the two of them, my cousin Darcy and Stan, to come and go through the box of artifacts that we found on the farm and identify their age and likely origin. So we discovered that these arrowheads my brothers and Dad had found were actually parts of stone tools and weapons, some at least 10,000 years old. And these artifacts turned up, and I'm sure many of you have known this on your farm, or you know people in Kent County. They've turned up over the ages, especially they started turning up when people switched from plowing with horses to tractors because it would go deeper. So a lot of them haven't. So there's never been an archaeological dig on our farm, so we can't say for sure who lived there, but all we can know from what Stan and Darcy told us is that people who use these sorts of tools passed over the land that I grew up on. Well, this is all very well for me, but what if you have a box of artifacts in your attic or back room or something? How could you get them identified? Well, I discovered that there's an artifact identification day that happens at the Scanado village of the Longwoods Road Conservation Area, usually in July. So that's good for people here, but if you're like some of the people out there on the Harvard meeting, another thing you might do is a visit or contact the Ontario Museum of Archaeology and also visit their website. And I found them really helpful in understanding this because they have some great videos narrated by the archaeologist, Dr. Chris Ellis, which give you a great idea of the history of the province since the time of the Ice Age. And they really helped me make sense of many scholarly papers I read about Ontario's archaeology. And they also helped me in writing my book. They reviewed the first chapter, among other things. And the Ontario Archaeology Society also has a good summary of Ontario's archaeological history on its website, as well as a list of the local chapters. So it gives you a clue of where you might peep them. And I've joined up to the Grand River chapter, and I find constantly learning some things that are relevant to my own area. But to really imagine what life must have been like on the 200 acres where I was raised, I plowed deep into the Bible of Southern Ontario archaeology, this compilation of essays produced by the London chapter of Ontario Archaeological Society in 1990. It's a gold mine, but it's tough going. I mean, these are academics writing, which is why I found the short videos at the Ontario Museum of Archaeology such a godsend. And the overview articles of the Ontario Archaeological Society so helpful. But all this is reconstructive work. It's imagine someone telling your life story based on the clues you left behind. So there is another source of information, and that is the Indigenous knowledge. Yeah, okay, I'm on the right page. And this is knowledge that is been passed down. And I have to say, it was at first was really easy for a settler like me to dismiss oral history. Because I'm sure we've all played the telephone game, you know, where you get in a circle and one person whispers in the ear and the next person passes it on. It's always good for a joke, you know, at the end to see how much it's garbled. But it wasn't until I read an interview with the Georgian Bay Métis writer, Cherie Demeline, that I started to imagine how oral could have been preserved. And she talked about how, as children, they had to listen to and then tell back the same stories night after night after night to their elders until they got them perfect. So I started to imagine and appreciate that there could be a different way of recording facts, and a different way of accumulating knowledge and passing it down to succeeding generations. I don't think I will ever completely grasp this knowledge in the sense of it becoming internalized or second nature. But I think settlers like us can become aware of it and can appreciate that others raised in this tradition from birth can. So a turning point for me was this podcast, which I'm referencing up here, a segment of the CBC radio program Tapestry, which is still available online, entitled How Blair Stonechild Reclaimed His Indigenous Spirituality. And I highly recommend it. It really helped me a lot. Two other authors who helped me appreciate the Indigenous worldview were John Borrows and Tom King. I discovered John Borrows, who I later learned grew up on the Cape Croker Reserve on the Bruce Peninsula, when he came to speak at the University of Waterloo about the School of Indigenous Law he was helping to found at the University of Victoria. He's written several books explaining the Indigenous worldview on various topics. And this one on Canadian and Canada's Indigenous Constitution, I found particularly helpful. And then Tom King. Now, maybe some of the others like you discovered him through the Dead Dog Cafe that used to be on CBC. But that's where I discovered him, and then I read most of his books ever since. And that's been really helpful to me. And The Inconvenient Indian is his account of the history of Indigenous people in Canada, as only he can tell it. Another path I followed, and which I recommend, was a free online course called Indigenous Canada, which is offered by the University of Alberta. This is especially helpful if you're studying land that's outside Southern Ontario, as it covers all of Canada. And there's a session that just started on Tuesday. You can take it at your own pace. It's completely free. And it's well worth doing. I think Cindy, you've done it too, so Cindy can recommend it as well. So this was one long voyage of discovery that began with a few arrowheads my dad and brothers found on the land where I grew up. Now, another time when I was down going through still more photos and files of my mom's, my brother Earl came in for coffee. Hey, did I ever tell you about that box of deeds we found in the basement of the house, which was the oldest house on the farm? Well, no. Well, it turned out there were 85 documents, mostly handwritten. And so deciphering and transcribing them took me most of one summer. But in the course of this, I made many discoveries. I knew that my great-great-grandfather, George Elgie, had purchased about 200 acres of land at Don Mills in 1870. And I knew that my grandfather, Earl, and my dad, Ken, had farmed 200 acres of land. So I just assumed, 200 acres from George passed down to 200 acres to Ab and to Earl and so on. But it wasn't like that. There were all kinds of sales, pieces of land, flipping back and forth, and land being carved up one way and sliced and diced another way. And I discovered there were lots of other owners besides the Elgies. And I learned from going through these deeds and piecing them together that the land had meant very different things to the various people who lived on it. For my brothers, who currently farm the 200 acres I grew up on, land is a renewable resource. They invest in its quality through soil conservation and woodlot measures. Like my dad, they love farming and they love the land and they take a long view. They want to be sure there will be productive land for future generations, not just humans, but also the birds and the animals who live there too. But other owners of the land, and again, I'm going from the transactions and the record of stuff that I can see, other holders of deeds in the box saw the land differently. Now, for the first owner of this land, George Anderson, it was a reward for military service in the War of 1812. And I doubt if George ever set foot on the land because he sold it off to a stranger in Pickering for $50 and a cow. And that's a pretty interesting story, just in chapter 3. That's also interesting how we piece that together too. But other owners realized that even though the soil around Don Mills is some of the most fertile in Ontario, you could make a lot more money off the land if you turned it into real estate and built houses on it. This may sound familiar to some people today. Still others, such as my great uncle William Elgie, saw the chief value of owning farmland for him was to be able to use it as collateral to take out loans to buy farm machinery and set up a thriving threshing machine business. So as I researched the history of the land I grew up on, I realized that the arrival of Europeans on the land where I eventually lived changed everything for people living there. Before contact, land was territory. It didn't belong to any one individual. There weren't deeds and boundaries carefully described in documents, such as we did when the settlers arrived. But it wasn't just unmarked, undifferentiated land either. Archaeologists have deduced that Paleo Indians who lived between 10,500 and 9,500 years ago didn't wander aimlessly over southern Ontario. No, they had a sense of territory. They had landmarks and special places. So archaeologist Peter Stork worked on the 2 sites marked by yellow stars on this chart. The Fisher site in the Blue Mountain Highlands near today's Collingwood, and the Park Hill site near Lake Huron. At both sites, he discovered tools from the very same distinctive rock, the microcrystalline form of the mineral quartz, known as chert. And at each site, there were special areas for different functions. For example, there was a camp where they chipped down the stone blocks in preparation for manufacturing tools for hunting and scraping hides. There was another area for chipping away smaller bits of rock to make fluted points. And to him, this showed that the people had marked out a territory, maybe perhaps living at the Fisher site in the Blue Mountains in the summer and then moving to the Park Hill site, which is slightly warmer in the winter. But in any case, land wasn't just land, it was territory. And other archaeologists found evidence of Paleo-Indian ceremonies and ritual at various points in this territory, but not described more in the book. Now, the sense of territory became more sophisticated as the climate warmed and the ice melted and the population increased. Iroquoian-speaking people living near the Grand River adopted to their land by establishing permanent villages with log houses and extensive farms. But that wasn't the case in southwestern Ontario, where the populations continued to be more mobile. The Algonquian speakers of southwestern Ontario continued to follow a basic subsistence settlement strategy, responding to the seasonal availability of plant and animal resources by moving to where there was abundance. And archaeologists have concluded, again, working backwards from the clues or evidence that they found, that there were patterns, a seasonal round, as it were. So there'd be like maple sugar making camps in the spring, and forests would have lots of maple trees. And then there'd be fishing camps at known good fishing spots in the spring. And then there would be hunting and fruit gathering in the summer, maybe with a base camp where the children, women, and elderly might stay. And then there'd be nut and seed gathering and more hunting in the fall and winter. And the boundaries and territories were fluid, And they were adjusted to meet the needs of the total group. And so if game was scarce in one area, they would kind of shift the boundaries and make sure that nobody had too much, but had what they needed. And this map, based on Neil Ferris's book, The Archaeology of Native Lived Colonialism, shows the approximate boundaries of Ojibwe territories around 1800 as Europeans were starting to settle southwestern Ontario. These people didn't go away once the Europeans came. And that's clearly shown by the diaries of Christian Donkey, a Moravian missionary, who was sent to convert the Ojibwe to Christianity. And these diaries are very, very interesting. They're well worth a read. And because Donkey recorded the existence of several seasonal camps along the Sydenham River, some for maple syrup making, some for fishing, some for hunting base camps. And the London chapter of the Ontario Archaeological Society translated his diaries and calculated the approximate location of camps, and that's what's shown on this map here. And you can see they're all along the Sydenham River there. And one, which in those days was known as Bear Creek. But the excavation of the Bellamy site, which is marked on the map there, is about 8 kilometers from where I grew up. And that proves that the Ojibwe were very good at adopting, fusing European trade goods as well as keeping their traditional way of life. A way of life they continued as long as they could until increasing numbers of settlers came, also wanting to settle along the river where they lived. The Ojibwe's relationship to the land was puzzling for Europeans like John. This is a little section from my book. They saw them as a nation of beggars because of their dances in front of settlers' houses at the same time begging for food. Whenever game was scarce or they had been unsuccessful in their hunting expeditions. Yet when the Ojibwe had an abundance of food, they feasted and made merry till it was all consumed. The idea of sharing the returns of a large, undivided expanse of land was foreign to the Europeans who first encountered Ojibwe on the land. But, and I read back in my early history of the Elgies, which I didn't do, but another cousin has done, discuss, you know, at a certain point, I think they probably settled like that too. Like when they lived on the commons, that would be more, you know, the territory and the rent and so on was adjusted to meet the needs of the people. But it had been centuries before this. Another way I learned about the historic period was by meeting with people from Nidawakjik. And they shared traditional knowledge as well as scholarly papers where they had written this down because they had realized that settler academics were more comfortable with written records. And they shared with me many papers they had written and showed me this book, which they collectively wrote and published in 1987. The book is out of print, but there is a copy in the Chatham Kent Library, and I was fortunate that there was one in the Wilfrid Laurier University, so I could borrow it from there. But what if the land your ancestors settled on isn't in Chatham Kent and you wanted to know more about it? How would you find out about it? Well, there are several websites that you can look at. This is one done by Indigenous Services Canada. And you can click on it and get some information about it. It's somewhat up to date. It goes up to the 2016 census. You can also go back to look at the original treaties. They're online at the University of British Columbia. But this site I found particularly good, Whose Land? And it's done by a number of youth groups, but it's quite wonderful. You can see there's 6 different things you can look at. You can click on a button and see what the Indigenous communities in your area are. Or you can click on another button and look at the various treaties. So, and things in between. So it's a really good resource and it seems to be very accurate. But if you want to look at historic records of land transactions, I'm sure most of you know here, the wonderful treasure we have in Chatham, Kent, and the George Center. And this was wonderful for me because I could see the actual print records, the handwritten retired abstracts books, which lists every transaction relating to a specific piece of land back from the first sale or deed from the Canada Company. Up to that, about 1971, when they decided they would microfilm them and type them up. But it's great to look at those handwritten records because you see all these little notes that were wonderful. And you'll see some of the things I found out in the book. But most retired abstract books were sent to the Ontario Archives, but fortunately, Chatham Kent said, no, we have a storage place we could get them, so they kept them, because otherwise, well, one turned up in a book drop at the Waterloo Regional Library. So you're very lucky to have this resource, and I was really lucky to find that resource here too. But these records are now online and you can search them as long as you go within the hours of On Land, which is a private company providing this service. And first you look for the area where you're trying to search, and then you choose historic books. And these are still free to search, so you can find some of these early records there. That's just a very brief summary of that. Anyway, I said at the beginning that learning about the people who lived on the land before your family arrived will change your perspective on your family's history. So here's one example from my experience. This is a section of the map of Camden Township from the 1881 Historic Atlas of Kent and Essex County. Yellow area is the 200 acres I grew up on. And if you look carefully, you can see there's two diagonal lines going through the farm. This is what is called in several documents I transcribed the Old Wabash Road. And on this map, I extended the road all the way to Wabash. So you can see it. Now, as a kid growing up on the farm, my experience of the Old Wabash Road was of a sandy knoll running through the middle of the field of white beans, which we kids had to hoe every summer. This ridge was really nice because it was nice and sandy soil, and the beans grew tall there, as well as the weeds grew tall there. So it was kind of a shady spot on this interminably, you can see how long those roads are. They never end, right? You know, you're hoeing, and finally you get to this nice, cool sand and stuff. And long, you had pigweed and ragweed and stuff. And I'm not sure whether herbicides weren't really widespread or my grandfather just didn't want to spend the money on them. But in any case, my parent had 6 kids, so lots of free labor. So there you go. As I researched what eventually became my book, I learned that many early roads in Ontario followed Indigenous trails, and that these trails often linked 2 bodies of water. So the Old Wabash Road was a link between the Sydenham and the Thames River. Now, the first owner of that land, William Taylor, who was the person who founded Don Mills, built the mill there, he kept that road open. He made sure the road was kept open when he sold it. So he reserved it from the sale, from the rest of the property when he sold it to his son-in-law, James Smith. But after my great-great-grandfather, George Elgie, bought that same piece of land in 1870, the first thing he did in 1871 was privatize it, no longer treat it as a public right-of-way, but say, okay, township, if you want to keep traveling over that road, you owe me $50 for the right to do that. So there are many ways you can look upon that. You know, one time I would have thought, well, my poor great-grandfather, because I knew what a hard time they'd had in Chatham Township. It was very challenging, and how hard they scraped together the money to move up here to buy the farm. So everybody said, well, that's really ingenious. But later on, I think, when I thought about how Indigenous people had used the land before settlers arrived and the respect they'd shown it as a resource, I have to say my perspective changed. So that's why I say learning about the people who lived on the land before your ancestors arrived changed my perspective on history. And personally, I feel that with growing awareness and increasing sensitivity to other people's narratives, it's important that all genealogical and family history takes a holistic an inclusive approach. I think this is certainly my belief anyway. I think it's time to forget the myth of European pioneers coming to empty lands and single-handedly as isolated trailblazers, turning wilderness into farming. So on that controversial note, I will end my talk and wait for comments and questions.
You want to tell us about your book?
Yes, this is my book, This Land, the story of 200 acres. And it was first published in 2019, and this is the second printing of it. And it is, as I say on the slide, it's I have some copies tonight. I also have some at my home in Waterloo, so people can pick it up and so on. But basically, the chapters go through the various people who lived on the land, like the Taylor family who founded William Taylor, who built the mill at Don Mills, and we talked about George Anderson and the various elders and so on.
So there are a couple questions. Maybe we'll take the ones online first.
Sure.
I don't know. Can you?
If you could just repeat them.
Hear me? First of all, we all want some brothers like you have that come out with these boxes and say, did I ever tell you about? It's like, yes. The Whose Land website, have never heard of it before, so that's a great resource. Thanks for sharing that. What was your favorite resource that you did use while you were doing your research?
Okay, so one that was really helpful for me, because when I set out to do this, I wanted to at least do a social and economic history. I wanted to think, why did they move from Chatham Township up to Camden Gore, or why did they move from Guelph? You know, because they landed in Guelph, and the family started in Guelph, and what was going on in the world that might have pushed them, or why would William Taylor have built this? You know? So I wanted to have like a framework, and I found this one book, The Economic History of the Dominion, that was put out by, I think, the Canadian Club or something, but it was like a souvenir edition. But I found that really useful because it looked at the decades of history and kind of said this was a decade of boom and bust and so on. And of course, because I was really interested in agricultural history, I looked for a history of agriculture, and I'm going to have to cheat and look at I brought along a list of resources. Actually, in the back of each chapter, I have the main resources that I used there. But I found those were kind of my anchor pieces. You know, they have that overriding economic history and then the agricultural history to do that.
So you do have a sheet of links?
I do.
So maybe, will you email that to me? And
Yes,
then we
I will
can
do
email
that,
it
and
to
I
anybody
have-
who's online as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Another question while you're looking at that is, I'm probably not gonna say it right, are the Denki diaries available?
the Donkey Diaries are available online. And I think it might have been on the slide that I had them. They were done by the London chapter of the, yeah, I do have the link on both. I'm pretty sure it was on the slide, and it's on this resource sheet as well. But the London chapter found someone who could translate that very old form of German and did it. And it's certainly interesting reading, and, you know, trying to put that perspective together with, say, John Borrell's writing or Tom King's writing, you know, just trying to figure out what's happening here, and to try and put on different pieces, different pairs of glasses as you read each one. That's fun.
And one more, you visited the McGeorge building. When did you visit? And you obviously had success. So was that a good experience?
Definitely. So we came down several times, and we were doing this, I suppose, 2012 to 2014, 15. My husband Phil came with me, and that was really helpful because I would just scan through the pages and look for Elgies or other names that I'd found in the deeds, you know, and try and see, okay, because this was the thing. It wasn't like somebody had a complete record, there were pieces missing. So how did they get from this piece of land over to this piece of land, you know? And so that's why we try and find that together. I'm sure you guys all know this kind of detective work and so on. Yeah, so that was good. And basically the people just let us do it. That was wonderful. They also pointed out that there were minute books from Camden Township, although a lot of them had been burned in a fire. But I discovered that one of my relatives had been the reeve of Camden Gore. And so that was really interesting to find out, you know, what was going on in the county and learn. Oh, and the other book I found there that I really loved was, I think it's called The Dipping Stick, about drainage. And drainage is so important in Chatham, Kent. Oh my God, especially Chatham Township. It's in that chapter. You know, like that was just vital. Good. Drainage.
We were lucky enough that, the folks at the McGeorge building, sent us a list basically of what their holdings are. So we have that in our library if anyone's interested.
Yeah.
So it's good to know they have.
And the other thing that was really lucky when we were there is we would get, these deed numbers, there were transaction numbers in the retired abstracts. And then we went to the land registry office or Service, Ontario, which at that time had staff, and they were super great staff in Chatham. I knew Phil had worked with the ones in Kitchener who were not nice, but the Chatham people were fantastic. So that was another fantastic experience, and they were so helpful in helping us, like, just use the microfilm, print it out, or, you know, help us think of another angle when we were stuck. That was great.
That's all online. Is there any questions from?
I have one more online that came from Ruth Nicholson. She says, your family settled about 90 years after the arrival of the settlers from the American Revolution. One of the earlier owners of your farm likely cut down trees and started the first European settlement. Did you find any evidence of this happening?
Yes, definitely. I found, let me think. There were accounts, some of the ones like I'm not sure how you say it, Gillette, Edwin, who's written a lot on early life in Upper Canada, wrote about that. The other thing that was really interesting to me, there was a commission, agricultural commission, I think in 1880, that traveled around Ontario, and they had hearings, including in Chatham. That was really interesting in terms of learning about the conditions, because people came and testified before these commissioners. And among other things, they said, you know, people, you really are cutting down too many trees. Now, I have a woodlot, and I find that keeps the erosion stopped, you know, and so on. So you kind of find the evidence of the direct evidence that that's happening here, as well as the historic accounts about the fires that went on and so on.
Anyone in the room have a question or a comment?
Just an amalgamation, all the information, all those township offices came to the McGeorge building because probably Tilbury's,
Yeah.
so it didn't exist anymore, but those records were kept.
Yeah, and they're a great source. Like if Camden Township hadn't had that fire, there would have been a lot more of our records, like, you know, in the George building, but there were other books there. I don't think I went through the minute books too much, but we went through the retired abstracts and you know, my great-great-grandfather moved to Richtown for a while. I tried to find that place, you know. Yeah, and then they bought land in Dresden, and that's where the Service Ontario people were great, because they said, well, we have these maps, you know, showing the various plans, you know. So it's really hard to beat in-person service.
There's another question at the back.
I have a comment.
Yes,
There. Big loud.
Yes, I'm Sherry Kraus, and I'm actually an archaeologist.
Oh,
And
great.
I've worked with most of the people that you talked about. Chris Ellis was my supervisor doing my
Oh,
master's
wow.
work. I actually worked with Neil Ferris and so forth, so I'm very familiar with the community. And I want to make the comment that I'm also interested in the history of the land that I just purchased. Even though I'm a newcomer, And I started from the perspective of the archaeology, because that's where my background was. So I knew about the sites in the area.
Yeah.
And so I'm developing an appreciation for that land by starting back and working forward. And I think that's important that everybody do that regardless of their connection, the family connection, because then we learn to understand the land and we appreciate it, and we're better stewards if we understand the history. So I really admire the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. That's exciting that you're doing it as well.
Yes.
That's really wonderful. I mean, you know, I gave a talk, basically this talk in Kitchener, and it was harder to think about it because, you know, people have just moved to cities and so on. And it's easier to become detached from it, but I do think the principles are there, you know, and it's really, I think it's helpful to us to think about the long history of the land and to think about the stewardship. I mean, it's different than what we would maybe do it ourselves, but the fact is, and that's where I found John Borrell so interesting to do. It was in one of his books that he would talk about the limit, like changing the hunting areas, or, you know, or kind of changing the areas that each clan or family could hunt.
Got two more questions online. First from Doreen, wanted to know where the Indian trees are located at. Where can you access the
Oh, the
Indian trees?
treaties? Is that what you
Yeah.
said, the treaties? Okay, let's go back to, see if I can go back to that. I went to the.
Hold on, I just need to activate your screen again. I can find, oh, where's my mouse? It's on the wrong
I
screen.
think it's the University of Alberta.
Yeah, the University of Alberta has the course. The actual treaties, I found them on land. Let's see, it's gonna be quite I found them at UBC. They're supposed to be someplace else.
There.
Yeah, this one's Indigenous Services Canada. And a profile, it has some information. That was the actual treaties. And this site was good for getting you started on what treaties there were, because you can see there's treaties and agreement. There's territories by city, indigenous communities, which just kind of tells you the name, whether Ojibwe or Cree or whatever, and so on. So that is very good. You know, it's still a matter of kind of piecing them together, going back and forth, because some are really complete lists of the treaties and others are good starting points.
Then I have a comment and a question from Ruth. Ruth has really enjoyed hearing about your journey to find the roots of your family's land. Well done. And she also asked whether the county biographical was of any use to you.
It
Says county.
the biographical history. Yes, that's, yeah, they, yes, I probably have I'm trying to think of the proper name for that.
Beers.
Memorable biographical.
Beers, yeah,
record.
beers. Okay, beers, you have to, I learned, several people cautioned me to take it with a grain of salt, because people buy those listings, and, it was somewhat useful to me. In that sometimes it kind of put me on the trail for other relatives. And I must say, if anybody here has researched the Taylor family, I would really love to get in touch with them, because I couldn't find much about the Taylors other than what I found in Beers. And it's such a fascinating family. I pieced together a lot from the deeds, including some, well, almost scandals. Yeah, nice little story about somebody whose grave is in the Don Mill Cemetery that I pieced together. He went off to Michigan to elope with her boyfriend at age 16 or something. Yeah, but yeah, so that, but what I also did find, I did find the atlas, the historical atlas, the accounts in that was good. And of course, Romantic Kent, although I did find one mistake. In the Romantic Kent. Yeah, you know, I mean, Romantic Kent was wonderful, but it's so frustrating to me because it didn't have a single footnote, you know, and I'm not a librarian, I want the reference.
Yeah, actually, Valley of the Lower Thames for the earlier
Oh.
history is much better.
Yeah, and that was my major resource, yeah, because it's well documented. Yeah.
One more, if we've got time, from Doreen, and she's just elaborating on her asking about the treaties. She's particularly interested in the arrowheads picture. She lives in Monroe, Michigan. Grew up in Taylor, about 45 minutes north of here, had all kinds of arrowheads all over the backyards, and she recognized the second one in your picture immediately.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that was so fascinating. That was Stan Wartner talked about how Lake Erie was very shallow, and I kind of touch on that in the book too. At various stages in the Ice Age, it was so shallow you could walk across from Fairview to Sandusky. So it's no wonder she's finding the same arrowhead, you know, as found on the farm.
That's it for online.
Any other questions?
Yeah, your brothers Earl and Bill farmed the 200 acres. Have they purchased other land in the area or rent other land to make it
Oh,
a
yes.
viable operation?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, they have.
I had Bill as a student at Ridgetown College, and Laurie too, that's his wife.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
Yes, you're right.
I forget
Yeah,
what year.
no, over the years, they have, at the time I wrote the book, they were farming about 700
Oh,
acres,
yeah,
which is still a very small amount
yeah,
to support two families.
right.
So I think they farm very efficiently and carefully, and they repair all their own machinery and so on and so forth. I really like how they farm myself, but.
They must have got a good education.
Yes, yes, thank you.
So you actually brought some folks with you, and then you also had somebody online. That was an LG. You were saying that she actually registered, and I did see her in here.
You know, yeah, my sister Mark did, and then Diane Scannell from San Antonio, Texas, was going to register. And she is the genealogist in the family, you know, like, you know, I was thinking about you know, how far you go back in history, like you saw my opinion about it. But I also think it's a little bit like genealogy. For my mom, 3 generations was what she wanted to do. Diane takes it all the way back to England. I'm not sure you have to, but I think it's richer if you can do more.
Any other questions? Well, I'm sure you're gonna hang around for a little bit.
Oh, yes.
We will, you know, take a chance to look at your book, or if people have more questions to ask you. So
And-
thank you
and,
so
and,
much. Oh, yeah, your handout.
I have a handout. Now, these are mostly about the indigenous references. But like I say, in the book, my major sources are there. And I also did do a fully footnoted version of this book. So if you're interested in all my references, I have. But I decided not to publish that because it would have made it twice as big.
Stay there. We want to thank you so much for coming. We really, truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. That was great. When you sent the PowerPoint to me, I was so excited because I had a sneak peek, and it was, I was so excited. I knew it was going to
Thank
be
you.
so good.
That's so nice.
Yeah, so like I say, you were gonna hang out for a little bit.
Oh, definitely.
Talk,
Yeah.
we're gonna chit chat, folks at home, sorry, go have yourself a coffee and a cookie. We purchased some family tree charts. I just want to let people know that we have them available. At conference, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we purchased a bunch and they went like hotcakes, and it's Christmas time, so it's a really good gift. The lady though, who did the charts, expanded it and has given us some extended charts that go along with it. So they're here tonight at the back. If you want them, they're $10 for the bundle. I just thought I'd let people know that we have those again, if anyone's interested. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. We don't have any presentations until March. So we take a break, but there's lots of other branches that are doing webinars and presentations, and maybe you're gonna wanna join the Indigenous course at the University of Alberta, right? And that could be something that you might wanna do some learning over the winter. So thanks everyone for coming.